Thank you for joining me in this series of videos on understanding Gurbani by yourself and for yourself. We agreed that what we needed was a methodology, that what we needed was a structured process for understanding Gurbani. We gave a name to this structured process, namely Gurbani framework. And we said that this framework consisted of 10 principles. In our previous 2 videos, we have looked at 2 principles. The first was getting from the literal to the spiritual. We agreed that this was a foundational principle in the sense that the entirety of Gurbani understanding rested squarely and firmly on this foundational principle. And the second principle was the Rahao. The links to my first 2 videos are in the description below. In our previous video, we agreed that every composition within Gurbani consisted of 3 forms. Every composition was a poem, every composition was a musical composition, and every composition had an intended spiritual message. So, for each of these, the Rahao would have different contextual meanings. For the poem, Rahao meant title. For the musical component, Rahao meant the chorus, asthai. And for the spiritual message, Rahao meant the core message verse, the summary verse. The Rahao verse represents the core message around which the rest of the Shabad or Bani revolves. The Rahao verse is the gist message, while the remaining verses are illustrations, examples, cases in point, supporting arguments, justifications, and rationalizations, or they are explanations, validations, clarifications, and corroborations. So now you know why the Guru told us to sing the Rahao verse as the chorus. Let's listen to one Shabad being sung by one of our well-known ragis.
Gun gawa nit tere tuj bin avar na jana mere sahiba. Gun gawa nit tere tuj bin avar na jana mere sahiba. Gun gawa nit तेरे तुझ बिन अवर न जाना मेरे साहिबा. गुण गावा नित तेरे तुझ बिन अवर न जाना मेरे साहिबा.
So, what you are hearing is Gun Gawa Nit Tere. Now, this is the Shabad as it appears in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Bilawal Mahla Pehla, Bilawal, first Mahal, composed by Guru Nanak to be sung in Bilawal Rag. This is the Rahao couplet. Man bedya dayal seti, meri main, kaun jane peer parai, hum nahi chint parai. The Guru wrote the word Rahao here, telling us that this is the title chorus, and the gist. The Rahao is outside the verse. We discussed the significance of it being written outside the verse in our previous video. Then he put the figure 1 before the Rahao. We discussed this too in our previous video. Do you hear the Ragi singing any of the words from this Rahao as his chorus? No. What he is singing as the chorus is Gun Gama Nit Tere. So the Ragi is taking this verse from paragraph 3. The verse is Tuj bin avar na jana mere sahiba gun gawa nit tere. Now, if that is not bad enough, he is not taking the verse as it is written. What he is doing is taking the back portion of it, this portion, Gun Gawa Nit Tere. So what he has done is to break up the verse into 2. This is the first part, Tuj bin avar na jana mere sahiba. And this is the second part, Gun Gawa Nit Tere. So in essence, he defied the Rahao, the Guru decided. Then he picked his own chorus. Then he rearranged it. Since we live in a world of Google and AI, this is how the verse will eventually go into the big data, broken and rearranged. So you ask, what's wrong? He is singing Bani. All Bani is the same, sung this way or that way, the front as the back and the back as the front. It is all Gurbani. So then I have to ask, why did the Guru bother telling us which is the Rahao? Why did the Guru care to provide us a certain arrangement? What does it matter if we can just rearrange it as we like? So Pyareo, this is what is going on in the world of Kirtan. It's come down to singing and entertaining, breaking up verses, rearranging them, etc. comes with the territory. And it is not about this one particular Ragi. I happened to pick him randomly. The reason we have discovered this, breaking the rule or whatever else you want to call it, is because we understand the structure of Gurbani. We understand it ourselves. So I hope you can see the value in wanting to know and understanding Gurbani yourself for yourself. And if someone is thinking, what is the big fuss of breaking up a verse? It is still Gurbani. Now, we all know the first slok of Jap Bani is Aad Sach, Jugad Sach, Hai Pi Sach, Nanak Hosi Pi Sach. There is an order here, the past, the present and the future. What if someone rearranged it and started the verse with Nanak Hosi Pi Sach and then ended up with Aad Sach, Jugad Sach? Would that be okay? Or would that be breaking up of Bani? Would that rearrangement amount to disrespect of Bani the way Guru Nanak wrote it? I leave you to think about it. Back to our methodology. Today, we will look at the third principle of our Gurbani framework methodology. We call it context. Context is defined as the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. No event happens in a vacuum. There always are related circumstances that will allow us to understand or assess the event better. Take the video I showed above. you were expected to understand it, evaluate it, assess it within a context. And that context was the use or non-use of the Guru determined Rahao verse as the chorus. Similarly, no statement or idea comes about in a vacuum. There always are related circumstances that will allow us to understand or assess the event better. Finding those circumstances is what context is all about. Let me give you a non-Gurbani example. So, let's say there is a decision taken. And to explain the decision properly, to assess the decision properly, to tell us about why it was made, to inform us about what were the circumstances behind the decision, to tell us about the terms in which it can be fully understood and assessed, we are given the context of the decision. The context here is planned cuts in spending. Now we are talking about Gurbani. Gurbani is written text. So what context does is this. Context shapes the text. Context provides meaning to the text. Gurbani is not written in single verse form. You just cannot take one verse and try to make sense of it. The building blocks of Gurbani are sloks, shabads, paudis, ashtapadis, chants, vars and banis. A selected number of verses are put together as paragraphs and then collectively into sections and then constructed into banis. There is a narrative in each paragraph, section and bani. Individual verses must therefore be taken as part of the entire narrative. That is context, the words in yellow. Taking individual verses to be part of the entire narrative is called providing context. Taking the entire narrative and applying it to the individual verses is called utilizing or using context. Now, if we don't know or don't care about context, then four things can happen. 1, our understanding becomes limited. 2, we misinterpret information. 3, we draw false conclusions. And 4, we can interpret any verse any which way we want. And you see this happening in the Sikh world. People quote single verses, provide their own interpretation and use the verse to establish whatever it is they are trying to prove. Let me give you an example that will put context into perspective. Say you read somewhere that share price of company A went up by 20% yesterday. Are you going to rush and buy based on this single piece of information? Probably not, because you will look for context and you find out that the price has been dropping 5% every day for the past 15 days. Now you still want to buy? In layman terms, we call it the big picture, and in methodology, we call it context. So these are the sources of context of Gurbani. The Rahao verse, the Rahao equivalent, the previous verse or the previous couplet, the next verse or the next couplet, the entire Shabad, other Shabads, and the general philosophy of Gurmat. The first source of context is the Rahao or the Rahao equivalent, and we have covered that in the previous video. Today, we will look at number 3 and number 4. We will discuss the rest in the subsequent videos. We use these 7 specific sources to provide the context to enable us to do 3 things. First, to get a proper understanding of the message. Second, to get to the intended message of the verse or the Shabad. And third, to help make the leap from the literal to the spiritual. Let's take this couplet of verses from page 27 of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Sri Rag Mahalla Tija Kar Pehla Lakh 84 ਭਰਮ ਦੇ ਭਰਮ ਹੋਏ ਖੁਆਰ ਪੂਰਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਮਾਵਣਾ ਕੋਏ ਨਾ ਮੇਟਣ ਹਾਰ. This is the translation that is available. Through 8.4 million incarnations, they wander lost and confused. Through all their wandering and roaming, they are ruined. They act according to their preordained destiny, which no one can erase. This is the standard English translation of the verses. It is taken from Sant Singh Khalsa's translation. The Punjabi translations have the same story. This is the translation of the same verses within the most common and most respected Punjabi translation, Darpan, the one by Professor Sahib Singh. ਉਹ ਮਾਇਆ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਭਟਕ ਕੇ ਲੋਭ ਲਹਿਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੁਆਰ ਹੋ ਕੇ 84 ਲੱਖ ਜੂਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਗੇੜ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਟਕਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਕੀ ਵਸ ਪੂਰਬਲੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀਤੇ ਕਰਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਉਕਰੇ ਸੰਸਕਾਰਾਂ ਅਨੁਸਾਰ ਹੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਕਰੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣੇ ਉਦਮ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸੰਸਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਟਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦਾ। The English translation of which is, they continue to wander through millions of incarnations and are ruined in wandering in the love for Maya. But it is not under their control because they have to act according to their preordained destiny based on past deeds of past lives which no one can erase. So, going by the translations above, we make the following 3 conclusions. 1. That Guru Amar Das Ji, the writer of these verses, accepts the notion of 8.4 million life forms. 2. That the Guru believes in the notion of past lives. And 3. That the Guru accepts the notion of preordained destiny. Otherwise, why would he write them? The above conclusions are true because he wrote them in his Bani. Going by the translations above, we make the following 3 conclusions about the position of Gurbani and Sikhi. 1. That Gurbani and by extension Sikhi accepts the notion of 8.4 million life forms. 2. That Gurbani and Sikhi believes in the notion of past lives. And 3. That Gurbani and Sikhi accepts the notion of preordained destiny, which means everything is out of our hands. We are living, operating, and functioning through the remote control of our past destinies, of our past lives. How do we form the above conclusions? Well, it is written in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji on page 27. But is this really the case? Are these conclusions accurate, correct, intended messages? To know the answer to these questions, we will need to find the context. Recall what we said would happen if we don't have or don't know or don't care about context. Our understanding becomes limited. We misinterpret information, we draw false conclusions, and we make up just about any translation that suits us. So, let's get back to what we listed out as specific sources of context of Gurbani. These specific sources are where we can obtain the context to enable us to get a proper understanding of the message and to get to the intended message of the verse or the shabad. We are going to apply source number 3, the previous verse or the previous couplet. So let's go back to the verses whose translation we were talking about. This is the shabad as it appears in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji on page 27. This is the verse couplet in red. Lakh 84 ਭਰਮ ਦੇ ਭਰਮ ਭਰਮ ਹੋਏ ਖੁਆਰ ਪੂਰਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਮਾਵਣਾ ਕੋਏ ਨਾ ਮੇਟਣ ਹਾਰ. This is the previous verse couplet in green. ਪੜ ਪੜ ਪੰਡਤ ਜੋਤ ਕੀ ਵਾਦ ਕਰੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਮਤ ਬੁੱਧ ਭਵੀ ਨਾ ਬੁਝਈ ਅੰਤਰ ਲੋਭ ਵਿਕਾਰ. So what we are going to do, what we need to do is to examine this previous verse couplet. Recall what we said about taking the entire narrative and then applying it to the individual verses. So here we are taking the narrative of the entire paragraph, paragraph number 3. So we are going to examine the previous couplet. This is the first verse of the previous couplet. Pad pad pandat jot ki vaad kare bichar. The meaning of the individual words are: pad pad means repeated recitations or repeated readings. Pandit refers to the Sanatan clergy. Jotki means scholars of Sanatan religious texts. Vad means debate. Kare means to undertake or to engage in. Vichar means discourse. So the meaning of this verse is: upon repeated readings and recitations, the clergy and Sanatan scholars engage in discourse and debate. Now let's look at the second verse of the previous couplet. Mat buddha pavi na bujjai antar lob vikar. Again, the meaning of the individual words are: mat refers to intellect, buddh means reason or the rational faculty of the human being, pavi literally means spun around, twisted, na bujjai do not understand, antar refers to within, lob to greed, and vikar refers to vices. So the meaning of this verse is: their twisted intellect and rational faculty, greed and vices within, allow them no understanding of the hukam. Now we look at the original verses again. Lakh 84 ਭਰਮ ਦੇ ਭਰਮ ਭਰਮ ਹੋਏ ਖੁਆਰ. The meaning of the individual words are on your screen. Accordingly then, the meaning of the verse is: beings are wandering in the 8.4 million life forms, and one becomes wayward through repeated wanderings. But there is a context to this verse, which is the previous verse, namely the clergy and Sanatan scholars. So that context has to be added to the translation. Why do we need to add that? Because the previous couplet is about the clergy and Sanatan scholars. So this is their claim. It is the claim of the clergy and Sanatan scholars. So the correct and accurate translation is: the clergy and Sanatan scholars claim that beings are wandering in the 8.4 million life forms, and one becomes wayward through repeated wanderings. The part in green is the context. Now we look at the second verse of the previous couplet. Purb likhya kamavana koe na metran har. Again, the meanings of the individual words are on your screen. So the translation is: beings are living out their preordained destinies that no one can destruct. But there is a context to this verse, which is the previous verse, namely the clergy and Sanatan scholars. So that context has to be added to the translation. Why do we need to add that? Because the previous couplet is about the clergy and the Sanatan scholars. So this is their claim. It is the claim of the clergy and Sanatan scholars. So again, the correct and accurate translation is the clergy and Sanatan scholars claim that beings are living out their preordained destinies that no one can destruct. The context that is coming from the previous verse is in green. So now we have to put the entire paragraph 3 together, 2 couplets, 4 verses in total. Pad pad pandit jot ki vaad kare vichar, mat buddh pavi na bujai, antar lob vikar. ਲੱਖ 84 ਭਰਮ ਦੇ ਭਰਮ ਹੋਏ ਖੁਆਰ ਪੂਰਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਮਾਵਣਾ ਕੋਏ ਨਾ ਮੇਟਣ ਹਾਰ. And the translation of this entire paragraph is, upon repeated readings and recitations, the clergy and Sanatan scholars engage in discourse and debate. Their twisted intellect and rational faculty, greed and vices within allow them no understanding of the hukam. They claim that beings are wandering in the 8.4 million life forms and one becomes wayward through repeated wanderings. They claim that beings are living out their preordained destinies that no one can destruct. Now, having understood and taken into consideration the context, can we make the following 3 conclusions we made earlier? 1. That Guru Amar Das Ji, the writer of these verses, accepts the notion of 8.4 million life forms. 2. That the Guru believes in the notion of past lives. And 3. That the Guru accepts the notion of preordained destiny. Can we say the above conclusions are true simply because the Guru wrote them in his Bani? Yes, he wrote them, but in what context? That is what we are trying to understand, the context. Now, having understood the context, can we also make the following 3 conclusions about the position of Gurbani and Sikhi? 1. That Gurbani and Sikhi accepts the notion of 8.4 million life forms. 2. That Gurbani and Sikhi believes in the notion of past lives. And 3. That Gurbani and Sikhi accepts the notion of preordained destiny. Now, having understood the context, can we say that this is the Gurbani position simply because it is written on page 27? Again, yes, the Guru wrote them, but in what context? That is what we are trying to understand, the context. You will come across a lot of Sikhs saying this or that is part of Sikhi because it is mentioned in Gurbani, because it's written in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. You find such people on YouTube, Twitter, social media, etc., all parroting the same thing unknowingly or unthinkingly. As they say in Punjabi, makhi te makhi marni. 8.4 million is mentioned in Gurbani, so it's part of Sikhi. Reincarnation is mentioned in Gurbani, so it's part of Sikhi. Heaven and hell is mentioned in Gurbani, so it's part of Sikhi. Dharmaraj is mentioned in Gurbani, so it's part of Sikhi. These are people who have never gone to school to learn context. Or perhaps they have, but they have an urge to ignore context to push their agenda that Sikhi believes in all these discarded beliefs. That Sikhi is just another branch of that big old Sanatan creeper of belief systems. Come to think of it, is mention of something equal to its acceptance? If I want to say I reject or abandon something, I will need to mention it. So that is my context of mentioning. I am mentioning to reject it. I am mentioning it to discard it. If I want to talk about something that is being used out there as a figure of speech, metaphor, idiom, I will have to mention it. I do not necessarily have to accept it. When I say something important in my class, I tell my university students, please download what I just said into your brain's hard drive. It's a figure of speech. I am not saying I accept or believe that the human brain has a hard drive. I am also not saying that I accept that things can be downloaded into our brains. What I'm doing is to redefine things such as hard drive and downloading to fit the needs of my students. All of them being millennials, they know and use these phrases. So all I'm doing is using their lingo to get my messages across. The 35 writers of Gurbani used a lot of religious lingo, phrases, concepts, etc. Things like reincarnation, afterlife, next life, heaven and hell, preordained destiny, etc. They were using the lingo of the masses to get their messages across. They used the prevalent lingo, but they redefined it to mean something else altogether. So, mentioning something is not an automatic acceptance of something. Hence, in the verses we are looking at here, Sri Rag Mahalla Tija Kar Pehla Lakh 84 ਭਰਮ ਦੇ ਭਰਮ ਭਰਮ ਹੋਏ ਖੁਆਰ ਪੂਰਬ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਕਮਾਵਣਾ ਕੋਈ ਨਾ ਮੇਟਣ ਹਾਰ. The context is provided by the previous couplet about the clergy and Sanatan scholars. Their repeated readings and recitations, their twisted intellect, their vices within, which allow them no understanding. This means the narrative of incarnations and preordained destiny in the above verses is that of the clergy, of the Sanatan scholars within their debates. It is not the narrative of Guru Amar Das Ji. The Guru is reproducing that narrative to comment on it through comparing and contrasting it with his own narrative which appears in the rest of the Shabda. The Guru is mentioning 8.4 million and past destiny in that context. This is the value of context. This is the critical importance of context to get to the proper and intended understanding. Thank you, Pyareo, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. We will look at the fourth principle in our methodology, namely spirituality of the self.